You are the you've been waiting for. And I promise that we came up with this before Frozen 2 came out. But there's a great song that goes with it now from Frozen 2. So for our keynote presentation today, we are really, really lucky to have Andrea Dalton in our region. She is an amazing leader in our region, and now she's our Vice President-elect of AMTA. So she's going to be talking to us today about that concept of advocating for yourself and having leadership skills in a presentation entitled, You Are the One You Have Been Waiting For, Tools of Advocacy and Leadership. So I am going to give the floor to Andrea Dalton.
Thank you, Jordan. Good to see many of you and at least see your names popping up on the screen below. I'm so glad to be here with you today. I just got finished teaching a 3-hour CMTE, and I am also teaching another one this afternoon. This is like a really busy day, and it's good though, because I get to spend this time with the people that I love. The music therapy world. It's really pretty amazing. And I will just apologize in advance. I have 2 small children and a husband in my house, and they're not quiet. So I've instructed them to be quiet, but you know, so just forgive me if I get interrupted. Hopefully everything will be just fine. I will be happy to answer questions as we go along if you want to type those in the chat. I probably won't answer a lot of them until the end, but I have left a lot of time for questions at the end. So most likely I won't pay a lot of attention to the chat until we get to the end, because I want to make sure I get through what I want to share with you today. And I also want to tell you that I'm using my music therapy travel mug this morning. So glad to be able to support you all and purchase one of those. And I got it hand delivered by Jacob, which was fantastic. I didn't see him, you know, he just dropped it on my porch, but that's the world we live in right now, right? So before I dive into the material, I do just want to tell you a little bit about myself. Jordan gave a lovely introduction. But I'll tell you some other things about me. I currently am not actually working as a music therapist. I haven't worked now in a lot of intentional music therapy practice for the last few years. And that is because I've been doing trauma-informed care consulting and training for a lot of organizations. I'm based at Truman Medical Centers in Kansas City, and in the behavioral health division, we have done a lot of work around trauma-informed care for many years. And several years ago, there was a lot of interest to push that out into the community and to be able to serve as a resource for our partner agencies and such in the Kansas City area. And that has also expanded across the whole country. And I had the pleasure of going out to Syracuse, New York to work at the Children's Hospital there, actually through a music therapy connection, which is always a great thing about being part of this community. And we've also done some work as far west as Denver, doing some work in the Denver Health and Hospital Authority system, kind of some remote work there. And the way I kind of got into that work is, I think, in a lot of ways through the advocacy and leadership work that I had already been doing as a music therapist. So I think a lot of those skills that I developed really have lent themselves to being able to do the work I'm doing now. And of course, having kind of that creative lens that I have as a music therapist has really enhanced my ability to be able to provide really good coaching and consulting for the agencies that I'm working with. So we're doing a lot of work in schools, several healthcare agencies, social service agencies, and a couple businesses too that have found out about trauma-informed care and said, hey, we don't really know what this is, but we think we need it. So I've done some work with a bank and also with an engineering firm, which is fascinating because they don't see the world the way like creative artsy people kind of do, like we do. So it's really fascinating to, and behavioral health too, like that lens is different. So it's interesting to see how that all plays together. But I was introduced to trauma-informed care when I was working as a music therapist at the state hospital system in Kansas. And I thought it was going to change the way we did everything. when I first heard about it. And this was probably 13 years ago now. And nothing happened after that training. We had a big training, huge training, and nothing really changed. And I was frustrated. And I mean, we did some things then in our creative arts therapist department that I think were pretty good. And that expanded kind of into the psychological and therapy services department. But I still had kind of a deep dissatisfaction for the way the change didn't happen. And so a lot of my work now has been focused on creating those organizational changes. And these skills of advocacy and leadership are, I think, essential in any kind of change. And it relates, I think, so amazingly well to the experience of a new music therapist. Because you are at that point where you're still kind of developing your identity as a clinician, and also your identity as an employee or as a business owner. You know, there's so much that's happening right there in that kind of crucible, I think, of the change. And so I think there are a lot of lessons that can be applied. So I'm hoping that what I share with you today will be empowering and enlightening. And again, please ask questions as we go along. I'm going to share my screen because I do have a few slides. What I'm going to talk about today are some tools that I think are really essential for advocacy, but they also relate really strongly with leadership. And I think advocacy and leadership really go hand in hand. So I'm actually going to ask you to use the chat right now, because I think we have a pretty big group of people in here. But just in a word or two, if you would, in the chat, how do you briefly define advocacy or being an advocate? What does that look like for you? And I'll pause just a second to let you have some input into that. And I'm going to try to make it bigger so I can read it or put my glasses on. This is what happens when you get older, folks. You got to start wearing glasses to read the chat on the video, on the video conference. Okay, so there's some great comments coming in here. Education, understanding, support, standing up for, living, breathing music therapy from my persona, sharing a passion, proactively and positively representing the music therapy field, ensuring that people have a correct understanding of music therapy, proactive education, sharing positive information, accurate information, representation. Yeah, those are great. Those are really great. Good, so now just to take it to kind of spin it a little bit, another question that I'll ask you to just type a response to in the chat. What are some of the qualities of leadership that you feel are important? Like, what are you looking for in a good leader? What do you want from that person? What do you want them to have? Good listener, humility. Oh my gosh, you guys are going fast. Compassion, guidance, inclusion, humility, someone who's outspoken, a servant's heart, communication, intelligence, respect, willing to listen, confidence, leads by example, willing to change. Wonderful. Did you guys read my notes ahead of time? This is great. This is great. Well, I think that just lets you know that, you know, we're together in this. Like, we're looking for the same kinds of things in people to be our leaders. And I think when we seek out those things, that is a sign to us also that, hey, we need to develop those in ourselves too, so that we can be that person for someone else. So that's kind of that theme, right? Of you are the one you've been waiting for. When we develop those skills and qualities in ourselves, then we're going to be able to pass that out to people and really be able to serve them and advocate for them in a powerful, powerful way. So you can keep, if you have other things you want to say there in the chat, you're welcome to type those in. So I do want to talk just a minute about leadership, because I think a lot of times when we think of leadership, we think of the people who have the power, right? We think of the people who have a title, you know, like the CEO or the executive director, or you know, something like that, department chair, those kinds of things. But leadership really happens, or it can happen, from wherever you are, in whatever group or organization you're part of, whether that's the Music Therapy Association, or it's your community, or your neighborhood, or your school, or your workplace, like so many places that you can be exhibiting these principles of leadership. And I think that's important because a huge piece of being an effective advocate and leader is to be authentic, to be the same person and have integrity. You know, do that wherever you are. You are who you are wherever you go. And really having that makes you easier to follow. It makes you, it brings people close to you because they know that you're honest. And so I have recently been doing some work with the Kansas Leadership Center. I'm really excited. I'm going to be going through a leadership coaching training with them. Hopefully later this summer, if we're back to being able to travel and such. But they have 5 principles of leadership that I wanted to share with you because I think they apply really well to advocacy also, as well as leadership. And the first is that leadership or advocacy is not, it's not a position. Like I said, it's an activity. It's something we do. There's a lot of action. The word leadership and the word advocacy are both action-oriented words. Anybody can lead or advocate anytime, anywhere. We all have that capacity. Now, there are a lot of factors that play a role in how we're heard. And I think that's an important thing to recognize. You know, the systems that we exist within often come with a lot of historical and systemic oppression for different groups of people. And while we may have the capacity to lead, sometimes we don't have the freedom to do that because of those systems. And so it takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of fighting sometimes. And it's okay if we don't always want to do that because that can be really exhausting. So I'll talk a little bit more about that too. Leadership and advocacy starts with you, and it must engage others. If we're alone in it, we're not really doing it. If we're not talking to someone else about what we're advocating for, we're not actually doing any advocacy. If we're not practicing leadership with other people, we're not really practicing leadership. So we have to engage other people, and your purpose must be clear. I think getting really clear about who you are and what you're doing, why you're doing it, is really, really important. And ultimately, it's risky. Leadership is risky, advocacy is risky. And so taking some time to understand what the risks are for us individually in different circumstances helps us to know what we need in order to move forward. So leadership and advocacy really, I think, go hand in hand. And in fact, I'd argue that you can't really have one without the other. And so I wanted to talk about this with you today because I think, you know, where you are kind of, you know, I know you're sort of on both sides of like maybe still being a student, or some of you may be new professionals, but that transition time is really a crucial time for your development. And I think having some of these skills of leadership and advocacy will enhance your clinical practice, will enhance your involvement in the organization of music therapists, for instance, and also any organizations that you're part of through work or extra, you know, community kinds of things. And I think no matter where we are, we're always advocating for music therapy. And if we're not, it's really hard for us to stay connected and stay in that community of music therapists. So even though I'm not practicing music therapy right now, I have made it a priority to advocate for music therapy with every single organization that I'm doing trauma-informed care consulting with. Most of them don't have a music therapist. Most of them haven't even heard of music therapy. So I'm